Okay. I guess Kim, I guess I won't be on screen. Alyssa and I got new computers, so we probably should have tested this out first.
It's okay.
But I just tried to unhook it and then I lost my connections, my laptop, so with the camera on it. So I guess I will not be on screen.
Okie doke.
And I've got 9:59 here.
Okay.
Okay, I have 10:01. We'll get started in just a minute or two.
Okay.
There's people waiting in the lobby to get in, so we'll give them an opportunity to get in to the webinar.
All right, I'll just follow your lead.
Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. I am Crystal McCain, the Director of Employment with the South Bend Human Rights Commission. And I apologize for not being on video. I received a new laptop last week and am still working out the kinks, so I apologize for that. But today's webinar is Unpacking Unconscious Bias with Dr. Kimberly Warren. Many of you were with us on September 28th, which was the first in this series of discussing our unconscious biases. At that time, Dr. Warren provided us with some great observations for us to consider about ourselves. This webinar series is intended for us to reframe our own reactions to certain situations. We also want you to participate. So Dr. Warren will, pose questions or ask for comments from us, and we want to give you an opportunity to answer or to comment. So please remember to unmute yourselves if you want to have a comment during this series, which we invite you to do. So at this time, I would like to bring back Dr. Kimberly Warren. Kim?
Hi, good morning. It's Kimberly, and for those who are coming back with us, thanks for coming back. And for anybody who's new, that's okay too, because we'll get you caught up on what we talked about just a little bit. Let me get my window or my screen share here. Let's see. Hey. Okay, I had it up at the beginning and now it doesn't want to participate.
Always goes that way, right?
Doesn't it? You know, technology is our best friend and our worst enemy, right?
Right,
Let's
right.
see if we can get it here. How about that?
Yep, it's up.
Is you all can see it okay, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
beautiful. Thanks for responding. So, as Crystal was so generous in suggesting that we had some really good concrete material to focus on last time, and I'm just going to take us to the next phase. So we talked about unpacking unconscious bias. Today, we're going to talk about a little bit more about how we mitigate our unconscious biases. So just again, as she said, this is an opportunity not for just for me to be speaking, but I like to bring you into the conversation too. So if I could take a couple minutes just to check in with everybody, what are you thinking, feeling, seeing about unconscious bias? Very briefly, can anybody give me some feedback?
This is Crystal.
Please.
Um, I think in this climate, we certainly, with the Black Lives Matters movement, with our president and some of the social issues that are going on, I know for myself, I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of biases about, certain situations. And of course, I know it's due to my upbringing, the circumstances I was and am involved in. So I know I think certain ways about certain things.
Thank you, Crystal. And that's very important to recognize and to be aware and to be able to verbalize and communicate, because as we noticed, or as we talked about, we all have them. Some of us aren't aware yet. Some of us aren't able to own yet. And some of us surely aren't able to express, especially publicly, that we have these biases. So thank you so much for putting that on the table to start this conversation. Could I get one more person just to weigh in to tell me what you're thinking or feeling about unconscious bias?
I have a thought.
Please.
So I didn't think about bias in life. I mean, I always look at people and deal with the person in front of me. Since all those, the voice of racial unrest, I've learned the idea of white privilege. And my question to my friends, where we've had some really candid conversations, is what can I do? I didn't even know that you were feeling this way, and I don't want you to. What can I do to change that?
Nice. So the question of what can I do, or what can I help others? I'm hopeful to get to that. I can't see the because my screen is up. I can't see who's speaking right now. But I am very happy that you are in dialogue. I am very happy that yours has increased, and I am very happy, and not for my sake, but for your sake and your engagement with others, that you are continuing on in this journey of what can I do? How can I learn? Where can I grow? Because remember, we talked about development is not just giving you information, it's shifting the way we think about things and shifting the way we do things. So hopefully after this hour's time, you'll have a little bit more concrete information to work with. So here's what I had the last time. We unpacked unconscious. We explored neuroscience, so we learned about the operating system, the brain, and how the brain works with unconscious bias. And then I gave you a call to action. So that's why I started out with, where are you? What are you thinking? What are you feeling since the last time that we engaged with each other? So my next question is, what have you actually done differently since the last session based on the information that you received. And I'm going to qualify the last person's response as having conversations, because I believe that's what I heard. So correct me if I'm wrong. Having conversations with people and allowing people to express and open up, and even just that whole introspection of, you know, I used to just look at people and see people for where they are and not even consider biases. Well, that's probably why we're in the shape we're in, because most of us just kind of take things at face value, whatever our nurture and our nature is, taking at face value. And we don't stop to do that reflection as much before as we are now in the current day because of our current day situations. So remember about the operating system. If you have a brain, you have bias. And that's not our cop out and that's not our opt out. That's more of a reason to help us to say we have to know what to do differently. The reason that if we're human and we have a functioning brain, that we have bias is because if you recall that 11 million pieces of information that we might be bombarded with at any given time, and only the brain only being able to process 40 to 50 pieces consciously at a time, and then only being able to take 7 pieces of that data to our short-term and then long-term memory. It's like memorizing someone's telephone number. So there's so much data coming at us that our mind cannot, in the conscious space, process all that data and categorize it accordingly without having some system or some process in order to rapidly. So when it comes to efficiency and effectiveness, efficient, yes, because that's a lot of data to be taking in, but effective, not always, because the information is being processed so rapidly. The brain has to have some way to rapidly deal with it and categorize it and automate it. But in that haste, sometimes it makes waste because that rapid automatic processing often yields discrepancies that come through as the biases. And these biases, we aren't even intentionally, consciously thinking about them, but they do impact our actions, our interactions, our words, our thoughts. And they don't, the unconscious biases, if you remember, are not always aligned with our conscious thoughts. So that's where a lot of the self-conflict comes into play. But because of neuroplasticity, our body, or excuse me, our brain's ability to change and to mold and to build new neural pathways, we don't have to stay stuck in those unconscious biases. We just need to start to pay attention to them in order that we can change them. So if we think about inactivity to reactivity to proactivity, we have to consider that out of our flaws and our insecurities, we model and reinforce to some of those around us, but it doesn't have to be that way because of our neuroplasticity, because of our desire to do things differently, to think about things differently, to engage with people differently, and our practice of doing so. So once we know this information, if we don't do something with it, it's the same thing as not knowing it at all. So knowing is one thing, taking this information and, you know, indulging in it when you're with me, or perhaps just maybe one other person, that's one thing. But when you take it farther than that, that's when the difference really will happen within you and within those who you engage with. So we're going to go back to that continuum of inactivity to proactivity and start with being versus becoming. Today, my major focus is giving you more applicable strategies that you can use right now to better engage with your own unconscious biases and to engage with others around their unconscious biases. But first things first, we have to get out of a fixed mindset, meaning I can't do it, I can't change, and get into that growth mindset. I can't do it yet, meaning we're still working and evolving. And this is from Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. So she talks all about accepting that we can learn and we can grow versus thinking that, you know, this is just who I am and that's the way I am. And at this phase in my life, there's nothing I can do different. Well, if you stay in that fixed mindset, believe you me, nothing's going to change for you. So in the growth mindset, we have to accept that bias is natural. It's just how the brain works. And we also have to recognize the bias paradox, that the brain works, the processing system works in the way that it works. Remember, efficiency versus effectiveness. The mental shortcuts helps the efficiency of the brain to process the data. The mind bugs are those things where the discrepancies and the biases come in. Those are the places where we can make the most dramatic change once we're aware and intentional and committed. So be intentional about recognizing your biases. And as Crystal said earlier today, we know we have biases, right? If we're human, we're biased in some way, some for good, some not so good, some absolutely not good at all. But knowing that, having that awareness, figuring out how we can make things different or how we can change the way we think about things is our most effective strategy up front. So using that growth mindset, perhaps I can't do it yet, but I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm evolving, and I will continue to evolve in this journey of diminishing my unconscious biases. We also talked about the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And we talk about how the operating system automatically and very quickly comes up with these thoughts and these stereotypes about people or groups or things or places. We contextualized everything last time in the reference of housing, but we have to contextualize unconscious bias about everything in our lives. We have to stop and slow down just a little bit and get out of system one, that quick automatic operating system, and getting to the system two of our brain, which gives us full attention to our efforts in our mental activities. So slowing down, not moving so fast. So that's the first thing that we can do in order to start to mitigate and reduce our biases. We can't eliminate them all. We can't stop the brain from being efficient, because if we do, that's not going to be good for us, because there's so much data and the amount of data is increasing continually. But we can take a pause and slow down. And we can offer empathy to others. And we can do continually that self-reflection and that inward looking and that retrospection that helps us to recognize, well, perhaps in that space I was biased, or maybe what I said there wasn't quite right, and how I thought about someone based on the way they spoke, that wasn't quite right. And then again, facing it. It's just the way it is that we have these biases. So I like that acronym of SELF: slowing down, having empathy, looking forward, and facing the reality in which we live. So let me kind of peel the onion back just a little bit more on that SELF acronym. Slowing down. We live in such a fast-paced world. Our attention span, the last that I heard in the research, was 8 seconds. Short amount of time. We need to be able to slow down to avoid making these quick, hasty decisions based on our stereotypical judgmental information that came along through our environment, media, how we were raised, whatever the case may be. We no longer have to live in that information, but we need to be able to slow down to be able to see what the information that what our brains are telling us, so that we can consider what our biases are, and even take an opportunity to consider what others' biases might be toward us. Because if we are human, we have biases, that means that other people have biases toward us too. So as an African-American female, as a person who has been born and raised in the Midwest and has traveled to other areas of the nation and of the world, as a person who works at Beacon Health System even, there are biases that others have toward me. There are biases that others have toward you. Think about, consider what they might be, and use that information to, again, add to your information database as you try to mitigate the biases that you have. And really take a moment, or take some moments, some reflective moments, to understand how you think through your biases and how they manifest in your day-to-day interactions. And try to start redirecting your thought patterns and your beliefs. It's not a matter of trying to suppress your biases. It's more useful and constructive to understand them and reframe them. We talked about reframing the last time, and reframe them to more positive, more useful, more engaging thoughts, beliefs, conversations, wherever you are. Just know that you're not going to be able to eliminate them completely, because sometimes you still don't know what they are and that they exist, but trying to understand them as they manifest in your awareness is most useful. And challenge them. And if you feel that you can't challenge your biases, as you're working with other people that you respect and that you're growing and evolving with in being and becoming, allow them to respectfully and empathically challenge your biases, and reject those negative biases that you hold toward others. It's not okay. It's not okay for us to have these biases, because we know the outcomes. So I'm going to take a moment and take a pause and see if anybody has a thought, a question, a comment, as we think about being and becoming and using the growth versus the fixed mindset.
Good morning, Kim. It's Deanna. How are you?
I am well, Deanna. I'm glad that you are here.
So I am listening to the information that you're sharing, and I can tell you that, just based on my own experience, it's a difficult process. It's one that a journey that I started long ago, but every day it's a process, and sometimes it's difficult to in an effort to not to be judgmental. It's almost like you're that much more judgmental, and then sometimes very hard on yourself as well. That has been, again, a difficult process. But I know that empathy, both for the person on the receiving end, and then empathy even for yourself, is something that is so needed. To sort of like giving yourself a break, even though you're going through the process. Have you heard that from other participants?
Absolutely, and I know it to be true myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the notion of changing the way that we think about things, no matter what your age is, and I'm not calling anybody out on age, but if you really stop and think about it, these biases, our unconscious biases, didn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You've come to this point in whatever your life journey, with all of those environmental variables and factors that have put us in the mindset that we're in right now. It's going to take us time. It's going to take us energy. It's going to take commitment. It's going to take resilience to get us through these paradigm shifts. If it were easy, guess what? We'd all would, for really serious about it, we'd be done. The work would be done. That's why I'm here again today, because it's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a lifelong journey. So thanks for saying that.
Thank you for that. And I thank you for the affirmation. I mean, it is difficult. It is really, really difficult. They're difficult conversations to have as well. And then just knowing how to deal with the pushback from, and I guess that's a question that I have as well. Like, you know, when you have pushback from other folks where you're trying to be empathetic, but, and then maybe just also being comfortable in the fact, or not comfortable, but just accepting of the fact that, you know, they're not quite, you know, at the same juncture of the journey that you're on. You know, I think that also is extremely important to take into consideration, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So let me keep talking, Deanna, because I have just a little bit of information. That was a great segue into the next piece of the conversation, the Declaration of Dignity. So imagine what the world would be like, just as I mentioned before, if we treated each other as if we mattered, if we all valued each other's dignity. Donna Hicks, I think I remembered I suggested that book to you all, Leading with Dignity, the last time that I was together. I also showed you Dushaw Hackett, who gave us the notion of, if we start to think about and work within an implicit bias approach, because the work that we've been doing to this point, and most of it around racism, has been from an explicit bias. And we all know that explicit bias is just simply people, it's not the unconscious, this is the conscious bias that I have. And this conscious bias, I don't mind letting you know about it in one way, whether it's my words or whether it's my actions. That explicit approach to diminishing our unconscious bias is just not going to work. And you know why? Can anybody tell me why? Safe space, just take a guess. It hasn't worked for the explicit bias. That's why we're still here, right? That's why we're dealing with racism. That's why we're dealing with situations where people are homophobic and they act out, and we have, things that happen to individuals based on their sexual orientation, based on age, based on whatever the case may be. So this explicit bias approach to diminishing bias hasn't even worked for that. So it absolutely is not going to work for the implicit biases that we have. And what Dushaw told us in that video, that TED Talk, is that the implicit bias approach offers a more expansive diagnosis and treatment than the explicit bias alone. So we are better able to understand not only how people act out explicitly, but how things manifest implicitly. And we can then take that information and work more broadly to manage it, to treat it. He also noted that implicit bias is predictive and preventive. Predictive in the sense that we offered up the information on the implicit association test through Harvard, where you can go in and take the test and measure your biases in the different categories. And it's preventive in the sense of, as we learn and grow and evolve, enhancing our awareness, increasing the dialogue around it, having the appropriate conversations around it, and teaching our younger people, our children, our future leaders. That's what's really important as we look at the social climate right now. Teaching our future leaders, the young people, what it means about this implicit bias and how to mitigate these biases, to get them started now versus waiting until, their second or third trimester in life, right? We have an opportunity here. And most importantly, it reduces shame and shaming. And many of you are aware of Brené Brown. And if you aren't, check into Brené Brown's work around vulnerability and shame and guilt. She's a researcher in all of these areas, and she's brought some very huge concepts and constructs to light based on her research that are really important in this climate. So shame versus guilt. Shame, the focus is on the self. If I'm shameful, it means to me that I'm just a bad person, right? I see myself as bad. If I deal with guilt, it's more focused on my behavior. I did something bad, but that doesn't mean I am a bad person. So as we're working through our unconscious biases, which one of these concepts should we stay away from for sure? And which one of these concepts might be more useful in helping people to be better engaged? Anybody want to take a guess? If you feel you're a bad person, what does that do to your value, your self-value, your self-worth, your self-esteem?
Kim, this is Jackie Rucker. So
Please.
if you feel you're a bad person, it affects your self-esteem and your self-value, like you say, but it also is like it's something that can't be changed because that's what I'm composed of. That's what I'm made of is bad. Whereas if it's a behavior that you focus on, then you can do something about behavior. But if you feel like it's like a cake, if you make a chocolate cake, when you get done, it's a chocolate cake. That's what it is. You can't change it. But if it's something that it's a birthday cake versus it's an anniversary cake, you can change what that is because that's not what it's made of. That's what it's used for, or that's what the behavior associated with it is about.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jackie, for saying that. And Jackie is absolutely right. So if we're playing the shame game with people, shame on you that you have that stereotypical thought, or shame on you that you treated that person that way, or shame on you that your ancestors were slaveholders. People get into that emotional stuck. It's a place of not being able to grow or change. It diminishes, it devalues, it negates people's worth and people's ability to move forward. Guilt, on the other hand, is the opportunity to accept the imperfection, to accept whatever is wrong, the behavior. It's an opportunity to be temporarily in discomfort, but it's also an opportunity to work through the emotion. So shame and guilt are both emotions, but shame keeps us stuck in the negative emotion, whereas guilt gives us the opportunity to accept it for what it is, whatever your role is, and then work through it so that you can get to a different way of thinking. And as Deanna mentioned earlier, we're all at different levels of readiness here when it comes to mitigating, being aware of, number one, and then mitigating our unconscious biases. It has a lot to do with our emotional intelligence. And perhaps in the future, we'll have the opportunity to delve into emotional intelligence just a little bit deeper. Deanna and I spoke about that. But being able to manage, being able to understand, perceiving, even being aware of what our emotions are, and then using those emotions to get out of the negativity, at least to a neutral emotion. It's like, it's not good, nor is it bad, or even getting to a positive space. You know what? I got through that. I know that I used to have these very stereotypical thoughts about, older people, but now I understand that, you know what, one day I might be an older person, and I wouldn't want anybody to treat me the way that I've treated that person who's driving slow along the street, and I'm in a hurry because I left late for work. All old people need to stay off the street, right? All old people need to stop using their driver's license. Well, my mom is a very mature person, and my mom still uses her driver's license. So when I'm on the street and I'm driving behind an elderly person who you can barely see because they're really tiny in their car, but they're going about 25 miles an hour, and I'm the one who left late for work, shame on me, right? Well, I shouldn't even say shame on me because I'm not the bad person, but I'm guilty of that initial thought of, I wish you'd move over so that I can get by. But yet I have to bring that back to, I would hate somebody to think that way about my mom. And at some point in the game, I'm hopeful that I will get to that point, and I would hate for somebody to feel that way about me. So we're all at different levels of readiness, as Deanna said. Some of us have moved through some of these emotions and some of these thoughts and this process even faster than others because we're more open-minded. And some of us are a little bit slower. And then, as Deanna said, kind of alluded to, she didn't say it, some of us, ladies and gentlemen, who's ever on this call, that no matter what you say or no matter what you do, they aren't going to change their minds. We are not going to change anybody. It is up to the individual at their level of readiness for their own change. We might be able to influence someone based on our mindset, our words, and our actions, but we won't be able to change anybody in this process. So if you come up against a lot of resistance, you take it to the level of your preparedness, but you don't go over the edge so that it becomes more of a disruptive engagement than it is a productive engagement. I was at a listening in on a webinar where a gentleman, a physician, was offering to other physicians the content on unconscious bias. And just saying, be open to other people's experiences and, think about, people of color who come in who have come in late diagnosis, and we make an opinion against them because, why are you so late? And he was just, putting it out there. And one of the audience participants spoke up and said, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with what you're saying, because what you're doing is you are perpetuating a victim mentality. And so the exchange kind of went back and forth, and I timed it for about 5 minutes because I was on a schedule that day. And the gentleman just stayed in his stance of, you are perpetuating a victim mentality, where the physician was trying to say, not having that experience of an underrepresented and underserved medical group, he wouldn't know what that felt like, but he wished that he could. So they had that exchange for a while until the moderator finally said, you know what, we need to move on. So I say all that to say, take it to the point of your level of readiness to engage with individuals who give you resistance. And I think I'm responding to Deanna's space, but don't push it over the edge, because some people are just not going to go with you then or ever. Everybody's not in this conversation with us. Everybody doesn't want the paradigm shift. Everybody doesn't want to be to have equity and fairness and justice, right? I think that's very evident in our society right now. We're not all in the game together. So just take it to your level of readiness and deal with empathy, non-judgment, compassion, and wisdom, and respect for someone's opinion. Even if you don't agree with it, it's still their opinion, right? So you don't want anybody taken away from your opinion, or I don't want anybody, I'll speak for myself, taking my opinion away. So let's be careful of suggesting and shaming people for their opinions. Just be sure that we're calling people in versus calling people out. And the call in is having people be where they are, but with empathy and compassion and kindness, still trying to engage them into the conversation where there are some commonalities, versus calling them out. Now, there is a place for a call out. So does everybody know what I'm talking about? Call in and call out cultures? Anybody want a further explanation on that?
If you wouldn't mind just giving us a brief synopsis, I would really like to hear a little bit more about the call in, call out versus.
So the call out culture is a prime example. The hashtag Me Too movement, right? That's a call out experience where women had gone in silence for a very long time. Women that had experienced sexual harassment and sexual inappropriate behaviors by others. And then they started to, they went in silence for a very long time, but finally got to the point where, one woman spoke up, and then another, and then another, and then another, to bring light to the situation, as long as it was factual and accurate information. That's calling out. Calling in is taking it the other way. Calling in is what's most appropriate when we talk about unconscious bias and the difficult conversations to have, not to shame people away, but to call them in based on where can we find some common ground? Where can we put head and heart together to have a conversation, open and empathic and compassionate? You know, we all, as we said, got our biases, but can we all be able to bring in our biases and be transparent and allow ourselves to be vulnerable? And wherever the guilt that we have, express that guilt and say, and I'm not saying Crystal expressed guilt up front, but Crystal did open up transparently and vulnerably and say, you know what, I have some biases and I know I have these biases, right? That's calling people in. We're open, nurturing people into and through this experience and these conversations. An Inclusive Leader by Jennifer Brown is another book I'm recommending for you all. Helping people to be safe and comfortable. Again, you might not agree with what they are saying, but allow them the opportunity to open up and say what they need to say. And embracing that, that's how they are wired, or that's their, but not diminishing them because of it. That's what call-in culture is about. It's the whole notion of, if you have flesh and blood, we accept you. We're all flawed. We all have experiences that we're not proud of. We all, again, have these biases, but it's until we hold a safe space for us to really get into the meat of the emotions and the feelings and the concerns and the fears that we have about this situation, our unconscious biases and how they manifest in so many different ways, we won't get anywhere. We have to have some safe space where we can call people in, not call people out. Was that helpful, Deanna?
I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'm going to say is continue to learn, continue to dialogue, and continue to evolve. That's what it's going to take in order for us to prepare ourselves for this journey, because it is a journey, and it's, as Deanna said, it's not an easy journey. So I'm gonna look at my watch clock. It's about 10:42. I'm gonna stop here because I wanted to save some space for perhaps some dialogue for the next 15 minutes or so before we have to close out. Any questions or thoughts?
This is Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
My daughter is 30. She works at UT Austin doing research. So I was talking to her about bias and stuff. And I asked her, growing up in South Bend and stuff is a different experience than being in a big city. But I asked her, did she feel like in her generation that there was a bias that kept people behind? And she said, actually, as she was growing up, she didn't really see it. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, I'm old. I'm 58. I realized, I went through busing, so I knew there was a problem and there were differences made to be empiric, but she didn't realize that. So I wondered if all that's going on, if the millennials and forward see differences like I do. Feel this unconscious bias.
I'm going to ask anybody else on the call if they would like to engage with Ruth's thought.
This is Jackie. So I have a daughter who's 30. And for the most part, I mean, and I'm African American, so my kids are conscious of who they are, but for the most part have grown up in neighborhoods and schools and things where there was a predominantly white environment and they were comfortable in them, but they are very conscious of the bias and how it affects them from the standpoint of there are times, so like right now, my daughter lives in central New York, a totally white community where she's happy, she's fine until she goes to a certain grocery store. And she's noticed that every time she goes in that grocery store, there's a call out over the loud system, you know, potential problem in aisle 6, which just happens to be the aisle that she's at, or that the store manager will follow her around. And
That
so
pisses me off.
so there's stuff like that, but I think my observation, so I have a 30-year-old and a 32-year-old. My observation is they seem to be more accepting in general. I think it's on a case-by-case basis. I don't think we can just have a blanket answer, but I do think that they experience bias in different ways, and it just depends on whether it's, I think it depends on where you're coming from and if you are the person that the bias is against or not. And I also think a lot has to do with age. I do think that there's a difference with age.
I agree with the age thing too. Just, I love the conversation and being more and more aware of how my interaction might affect others. I don't go around thinking I'm bad to anybody, so I don't have to be paranoid. I went to dinner, this was even before the civil unrest that we're having now, with a friend of mine who's Black, and she got pissed off at the waitress. And when we got back in the car, I said, what the hell was that? And she and I saw a situation, the same situation, completely differently. And we have explored that. Believe me, she's taken me to school. I've taken her to school. I don't know. But what it boiled down to me is the perception.
Mhm.
We still talk about that too. She says I'm dumb, but I don't know. I didn't see it.
So if I can, I appreciate that, Jackie, that you engaged in that conversation. And if I can, if no one else wants to, before I go in here, add the thought that in my opinion, I believe that in the era of the millennials and the Gen X's, I believe that they are more open to other races as individuals generally versus, and Jackie and I grew up in the same era and went to school together. We had a class of 300 plus individuals, and through middle school, high school, we didn't have like any racial issues that I can recall. Now there might have been some, but that we were very open-minded, if I can say that, based on race.
I would agree.
What we see today, and when my children were in high school, again, it was not race issues per se, but there was a division. The Black kids would be together, the Latinos would be together, and the African American and the Caucasian. You know, pretty much there wasn't a lot of overlapping like we saw when we were in high school of the different races, but at least they got along. There weren't these race wars, so to speak. I believe that the younger generations, where the racial or the differences or the inequities is still mostly in the structure, the infrastructure of the society, the organizations and the institutions. Where we have a benefit, though, is that so many organizations and companies and corporations now are focusing more on diversity, equity, and inclusion in being preventive versus reactive. And I believe that that will help them. But we still have mindsets in these corporations, organizations, and institutions that are of the old mindset of the division of whether it's the sexual orientation or race or, gender. We still have gender issues, pay equity, right? That's still a huge problem in the gender space, and age, as we think about the younger generations coming in and the biases against people who are aged, and a huge problem in our society right now is weight, right? Weight, ability, or disability. Those are huge issues in our world right now. How we look at people and think about people based on their physical appearance. So I understand where your daughter's coming from, because I believe that if I were to ask my children the same thing, they didn't have the same experiences that we had. But I understand the person that you went to dinner with, Ruth, whose perception and perhaps experience, actually, it might not have been all perceptual, it might have been experience, but you being one of the majority and she being the minority, you still sitting with that person don't have that experience, because you're the majority, you're the like-minded, you fit, whereas
Wait, the waitress was Asian.
oh, and it that too, because there are biases there. If you really stop and think about it, the African American race is the most disliked race among all other races, right?
I don't know.
Okay.
All right, that's not my experience, but I know it. See, that's what it comes down sometimes to me. Like I was saying to my friends, and I was in a group of predominantly Black people who were doing good deeds. And so why did they take me to school? And it's like, I just keep on saying, what do you want me to do about it? You experience something different than me, and I can't help that. What am I supposed to do? And even in that situation, she said, you should have spoken up. I said, I didn't see it. And that's what I wish I could change or help. I don't see things. But that was one experience. I'm trying to figure out what I'm missing.
That the Black race is the one that's generally, so I'm gonna ask you, if you're willing, research that. Do some research on the races and how they come into play. There is some research behind it. I can't give you the exact name right now, but I'm more than happy to look it up and find it for you. There's some research that suggests that if we think about the different races, and if we think about race is a socially constructed, race is not a biological construction. Race is socially constructed through colonization. It's the color of the skin. That's it.
This country has systematically tried to keep Black people down. I mean, gun control laws were made to prevent Black people, redlining. I mean, within my lifetime, it's amazing that there's progress, but I can't believe the things I didn't know that were systematic racism.
Yeah, it's all in it's in the thread of our nation. Right. It was an economic process that got engaged by money.
Yeah.
So that's a whole new conversation, but we got about 7 minutes left. Is there, and I'm not cutting you off, Ruth, I'm gonna stop talking.
Oh, I appreciate it, no problem.
Is there any other thoughts that we can unpack before we call it? I got my clock says 10:53. I'm trying to be respectful of everybody's time.
Kimberly, is there is there another part to this series, or is there a landing page or some place where resources will be made available?
I'm going to defer that question to Deanna.
Hi, Jackie, it's Deanna. So yes, we will be sharing the recommended, the readings that the books and any kind of resource that Kimberly has cited, we will make sure to share that. We shared that at the last training. These trainings are recorded as well. And we hope to be able to continue these discussions perhaps in November and maybe once more in December. I think that they are very important to the growth and development, but just wanted to share that, yes, we will be sharing this information at the end of the training. The participants will be receiving a list again of the any research cited and any books cited, and certainly Kimberly's contact information, being that her email for future contact should you need it. And then, of course, you can always reach out to the commission, the Human Rights Commission, and we'll provide that contact information at the end here as well, should there be any questions. But does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yes. So there's an article I was looking for while you were talking. I actually found it.
Okay.
In response to when Kimberly suggested that Ruth do some research. There's an article called Racial Battle Fatigue, and it's by Dr. William Smith. And it talks about some of the things that African Americans experience as a result of dealing with issues of bias. But it also talks about how other groups, Latinx, Asian, how they perceive us as well. And so that's one that you might want to check out.
Jackie, will you give me the name of the individual again?
His name is Dr. William Smith, and I am trying to pull it up because I think racial battle fatigue might be the topic, not necessarily the title. So I'm trying to.
And as Jackie is looking that up, Jackie, if you find it, you can shoot it to me and I'll be able to shoot it to Deanna. If
Okay.
I can, Ruth, offer you one more thought. You said, what can I do to help? I think a big thing, you can't change the way your friend perceives her experience, but you can have empathy. And I'm going to recommend do you like to read? Are you a reader?
Absolutely.
I'm just going to recommend the book to everybody. It's called The Empathy Effect. And it's by Helen Reese. And Deanna, I'll send you that reference as well.
Okay, thank you, Kim.
Yep. So I'm needing to wrap this up for us to be left behind. So again, my take on it is, just learn. Anybody who's willing to talk to you respectfully, cordially, be there with them in the conversation, hear with empathy and compassion, and, just learn as much as you can and grow, because the other thing that many individuals are suggesting is that, I want to learn. What can you teach me? There's so much information. Don't wait for somebody to teach you. Go get it. You don't have to wait for anybody to teach you anything. There is so much out there right now because of the climate. Go and find what you want, what you need, and everything you find gives you more and more resources and references. So go out there and get it. And then lastly, I'm going to put you to task yet, just in case we see each other again. I can ask you, what did you do differently as a result of your time invested today? Granted, it was only an hour, but every moment counts. So what are you going to do differently now that you know what you know, and now that you've heard what you've heard? Let's see what you're going to take it to, how you're going to take it to action. So thank you, Deanna, for coordinating this development opportunity, because remember, this is not a training.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing I do here is training. This is about development. This is about paradigm shifting. This is about thinking about and then responding and being about something different than what you were before we started the conversation. And thanks to each of you for engaging with me and allowing me and trusting me, and for having the courage to be the change that you want to see. So have a wonderful day, be blessed, and take good care and stay safe out there.
Thank you, Kimberly. We appreciate this time that you've taken with us to present us with this, this development opportunity. And I hope that folks will join us again in November. I will send out, we'll make sure to send out invites. We'll make sure to send out a reading list and, citing some of the resources as well, the additional resources that we discussed here today. And I want to take this time to really thank you for everyone who's been on here with us and joined us here today. My apologies that I was not here earlier, but my colleague I know took care of it, Crystal. So thank you so very much. And I know that I've had a great staff that has also assisted Kimberly in this process. Alyssa and Brittany, thank you so much for your help this morning. And again, I want to take the time out to just let everybody know we truly appreciate the opportunity to present you with this this opportunity. They don't often come along, and when they do, I think it's important that when you're in a safe space that you're able to share. It's important. It's an important time. It's an important process. It's deep. It hurts. It's ugly sometimes. But the accepting part is, I think sometimes the first step that we need to take. So again, I just want to thank Kimberly. Jackie, thank you for your sharing of resources and information as well, and to Ruth as well for the opportunity to not necessarily take you to school or anything like that, but just to present that opportunity to appreciate your situations and our situations and everyone's situations. So again, thank you so very much. I appreciate you this morning and every day. And hopefully we'll see you again in November. And please look for that Works Cited page. If you don't find it, if you don't receive it, please give us a call so that we can get that information to you. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Like